Hello and welcome to BYJU'S IAS. If you're liking our initiatives and our lectures have helped you in your preparation, please don't forget to like this video, subscribe to our channel and recommend this channel to your friends and fellow aspirants. Let's see if we can have 10,000 likes on this video. That's one way of letting us know that we are of some help to you. So press the like button and let's get started with the analysis of today's The Hindu newspaper, beginning with a news item on page number 1 of the Delhi edition of The Hindu relevant for GS paper 2. Time limit on advance bail violates personal liberty, says the Supreme Court. In 1970s, Justices V.R. Krishna Iyer and P.N. Bhagwati, they are credited with judicial activism in India. In fact, Justice V.R. Krishna Iyer said, jail is an exception, bail is a norm. As much as possible, release the accused on bail because bail is the norm, jail is the exception. Only in exceptional circumstances should an accused be put behind the bars. But bail can be broadly categorized into two categories: pre-arrest, post-arrest. What is this post-arrest bail? Let's say, for example, there is an individual X who is accused of a crime and then he is arrested by the police. FIR is filed, charge sheet is filed, investigation is going on, or investigation is complete, or investigation is going nowhere. This accused can approach the court for bail. And if the court is satisfied, bail will be granted to this accused. That means post-arrest bail is something where an individual is already arrested and then he is released on bail. What is this pre-arrest bail? Pre-arrest bail is something that we call an anticipatory bail. That means an individual anticipates arrest. An individual fears arrest. If you look at the original CRPC of 1898, it had nothing regarding anticipatory bail. But when CRPC was enacted post-independence in the year 1973, section 438 was added, and this talks about anticipatory bail under our criminal system. Anticipatory bail becomes very important in cases involving political vendetta. Let's say, for example, you are a critic of the government. The government wants to silence you. You are arrested under a false case. And once you are arrested, your life and liberty is gone. Section 438 of CRPC provides for an anticipatory bail. If you are anticipating arrest, if you fear arrest, approach the court for an anticipatory bail, and if the court is satisfied with your arguments, it can grant you an anticipatory bail. But the question is, this anticipatory bail is for how long? This is where the controversy was. Some previous judgments of the court said anticipatory bail can only be for few days, while other verdicts of the court said anticipatory bail can last for an indefinite period. To resolve this conflict, a 5-judge constitution bench of the Supreme Court was set up, and now the Supreme Court has given its final ruling. Let's look at what the court had to say. Number 1, the court said, if we impose time limit on an anticipatory bail, saying that anticipatory bail can only last for few days, that means we are violating the personal liberty of an individual, and this personal liberty is part of Article 21 of the Constitution of India, which deals with the right to life and personal liberty. So first thing that the court said, there can be no time limit on anticipatory bail. Second, the question was, when can an individual apply for an anticipatory bail? And the court answered and said, any time. That means an individual can apply for anticipatory bail even before the FIR is filed. That means at any point in time, if an individual fears arrest, if an individual anticipates arrest, even if no FIR has been filed, this individual can approach the court for an anticipatory bail. In this case, the court accepted the arguments of Advocate Hareen Rawal, who acted as the amicus curiae. Who is an amicus curiae? Basically, friend of the court. In cases such as public interest litigations, the Supreme Court asks a senior advocate of the court to please act as the friend of the court, as amicus curiae, and help the court in reaching to a correct judgment. In this case, amicus curiae said anticipatory bail should continue. There should be no limit on anticipatory bail because political vendetta is on rise. Why? Because the rivalry, political rivalry is increasing day by day. And there is a tendency where this political rivalry will increase, which means false cases can be filed against political rivals. If false cases are filed, right to reputation gets violated, personal liberty gets violated. So you should not be imposing any time limit on anticipatory bail. That's something very important that the court accepted. Third important thing, the court said when an individual approaches for an anticipatory bail, the court may grant anticipatory bail even without hearing the other side. And who is the other side? The state, the prosecution. That means even without hearing the other side of the story, even without hearing the prosecution, the court may grant anticipatory bail. That's a very important thing. And fourth, the question before the court was, should we provide for blanket anticipatory bail, or should the court satisfy itself with some of the conditions and then grant anticipatory bail? The court said we cannot impose blanket conditions. That means we will not list the conditions on the basis of which anticipatory bail will be granted by the court. The bail will be granted on case-to-case basis, which primarily means that if there is an accused who may threaten the witnesses, no bail can be provided. If there is an accused who may tamper with the evidence, bail should not be provided. If there is an accused who may run away from the country, who is at a flight risk, we may not grant anticipatory bail to these individuals. That means we can't put blanket conditions before an individual applies for an anticipatory bail. We have to look at cases individually and then take a decision whether anticipatory bail should be granted or not. That is what you need to understand from this newspaper article. There is another news on page number 1. Center advises against travel to China. Indigo and Air India, they have cut services. In fact, today the first positive case of coronavirus has been detected in Kerala. But this virus we have discussed on 2 days previously, on 21st and 24th January. Please go through those 2 video lectures, then you don't need to read this newspaper article. Now let's look at another news on page number 1. Cabinet nod for raising abortion limit to 24 weeks. Gujarat High Court, in the year 2015, it dismissed a petition filed by a gang rape victim who had sought permission to terminate her 7-month pregnancy. Which means a petition was filed in the Gujarat High Court by a gang rape victim. She was 7 months pregnant. The court rejected her abortion plea and said, bravely go ahead with the pregnancy, and when the time comes, deliver the child. The High Court said that such permission for abortion cannot be granted since the period of permitting abortion is over. And if we will allow abortion at this point in time, it will adversely affect the woman as well as her fetus. What is the law? Abortion is legal in India since 1971, when Medical Termination of Pregnancy Act was passed in the year 1971. According to this act, abortion can be performed until the 20th week of pregnancy. But this 20-week period can be divided into 2 periods, up to 12 weeks of pregnancy and 12 to 20 weeks. According to this 1971 law, if a woman is pregnant for 12 weeks and she wants abortion, this can be done if a doctor is certifying that abortion should be carried out, otherwise the health of the woman would get affected or there is a danger to the fetus. But if the abortion is to be carried out on a woman who is 12 to 20 weeks pregnant, then in that case, second doctor's opinion is also considered. That means without the opinion of the second doctor, abortion cannot be prescribed on a woman who is pregnant for 12 to 20 weeks. But under what conditions is abortion permitted? Condition number 1, if a woman has a serious disease and pregnancy can endanger her health, abortion is permitted. If the fetus is at a substantial risk of either a physical or mental handicap, abortion is permitted. If the pregnancy is the result of a rape, abortion is permitted. If a woman's socio-economic status is also something very poor and she may not afford a healthy pregnancy, in that case also abortion is permitted, but only up to 20 weeks. There was a long pending demand that this 20-week period should be enhanced to either 24 weeks. Some activists also said that it should be enhanced till 27 weeks. And now what the Union Cabinet has said, it has given its nod, and abortion limit is to be raised to 24 weeks. For that, a bill to amend this 1971 law will be tabled in the parliament in the budget session, and maybe this bill will be passed and abortion limit will be raised to 24 weeks. But why? In 2008, a Mumbai couple approached the Bombay High Court that please allow us to abort our 26-week-old fetus. Why? Because this fetus has been diagnosed with a heart defect. And even if this fetus is given birth to, the child is born, he may not survive for long. And if he survives, he is going to undergo severe medical complications. For this very reason, we should be allowed to abort our child. The High Court rejected this petition and said, for this, law should be changed. We cannot change the law can only be changed by the parliament. So unless and until parliament changes the law and allows you to abort your child, we are helpless. There are two legitimate reasons why this law should be changed. Number one, in decades since 1971, when abortion law was passed for the first time, the science has made enormous gains. There is an advent of ultrasound, MRI, there are various fetal monitoring devices, and health of the baby can be predicted very accurately and in a sophisticated manner. If beyond the 20-week period, if the science can accurately predict whether the fetus will develop some abnormalities if he is born, then ultimately we should allow this fetus to be aborted. Second genuine reason is, if you don't legally allow abortion, then people will approach the quacks. And thereby we are endangering the health of the woman as well. That is why the law must change. But there are activists who say that this increase in limit from 20 weeks to 24 weeks is insufficient. This increase should be till 27 weeks or 28 weeks. Why? Because even if the abortion is carried out in 28th week, the science has made such an advancement that it will not endanger the life and health of a woman. That is why this limit should be increased. Let's wait for this bill to be passed by the parliament, then we will have an elaborate discussion on this law. Now let's look at another news on page number 12. Comedian Kunal Kamra verbally heckled Indian journalist Arnab Goswami on an Indigo flight. In response to that, Indigo banned Kunal Kamra from flying for 6 months. Based on that, 3 other airlines, SpiceJet, Go Air and Air India, they have banned the comedian for an indefinite period till further notice. Let's look at this newspaper article in great detail. In the year 2017, one Shiv Sena MP slapped Air India official multiple times. And in response to that, 2 airlines banned the MP from traveling for a period of 2 weeks. But a need was felt that those passengers who perform unruly, whose behavior is unruly on board the flight, they should be penalized so that flying experience can be made better, so that these unruly passengers are not a threat to the flight, are not a threat to the fellow passengers as well. That is why rules were made to deal with these unruly passengers. But what are the rules? If an individual A, he is accused of unruly behavior, what will happen? A complaint needs to be filed. Who can file this complaint? The pilot in command. This complaint will be probed by the internal committee of that airline. Let's say, for example, this incident involving Kunal Kamra and Arnab Goswami, it happened on board Indigo airline. The complaint should be filed by the pilot in command and shall be probed by the internal committee of the Indigo Airlines. and the committee has to submit its report within a period of 30 days. What will happen in this 30-day period? This passenger may be banned from traveling on an Indigo airplane. But if no report is submitted within 30-day period by this internal committee, this individual goes scot-free. No action is taken against this individual. But there are various levels of assault, or there are various levels of unruly behavior. Level 1, level 2, level 3. Level 1 is verbal assault, for which the punishment is that for 3 months, this individual should be debarred from traveling. Level 2, if there is a physical assault, and physical assault can lead to a passenger being debarred from flying for up to 6 months. And if there is a life-threatening unruly behavior, it may lead to debarment for a minimum of 2 years. But if this unruly behavior occurred on board the Indigo airplane, what happens to the other airlines? Other airlines, they will have to take action after this internal committee has submitted its report and impose these punishments on the individual unruly passenger. And then the name of this individual is added to the no-fly list, which means that you will not be in a position to fly for a period of 3 months or 6 months or 2 years or more, depending upon your level of unruly behavior. Additionally, Ministry of Home Affairs also may recommend few names to be added to this no-fly list if these individuals are threat to national security. If this individual A is not happy with the report of this internal committee, he can file an appeal before an appellate committee, and the decision of the appellate committee, which will be set up by Civil Aviation Ministry, shall be final and binding. And even if you are not satisfied with the report of this appellate committee, then you can approach the concerned High Court as well. This newspaper article says that maybe the ban on Kunal Kamra is arbitrary. Why? The incident happened on board the Indigo airplane. We don't know whether the pilot in command has submitted the formal complaint or not. But initially, Kunal Kamra should have been banned only for a period of 30 days, that too by only Indigo Airlines, because we'll have to wait for the report of the internal committee. Once the internal committee submits its report, then other airlines should follow that up and ultimately decide whether Kunal Kamra should be banned from flying or not. The Directorate General of Civil Aviation, they have backed the action by airlines against Kunal Kamra. That's what you need to understand from this newspaper article. But before we end this discussion, one important thing: these rules apply only to the domestic airlines. Doesn't apply to international airlines. Now let's look at some of the editorials and columns from today's newspaper. First one, Planned Injustice. This is about the two-state solution plan of Donald Trump to end the Israel-Palestine conflict. There is a related newspaper article on page number 14 as well, which talks about, will Donald Trump's peace plan help resolve Israel-Palestine crisis? We will look at this editorial and this newspaper article together. But to understand these, we need to go back to the early 1900s. Israel-Palestine conflict is primarily a conflict of two religions, Islam and Judaism, or should we say between the Muslims and the Jews. Let's not go too far back in time, but let's travel to the early 1900s. This was the Ottoman Empire. The entire Middle East that you see today was under the Ottoman Empire for centuries. This area was also diverse with Muslims, Christians, and small number of Jews, and they generally lived in peace. However, this was changing, and there are two reasons for that. Number one, there was developing a feeling of ethnicity, particularly amongst the Palestinians. And number two, more and more Jews were joining a movement called Zionism, which said that Judaism was not just a religion, but a nationality. And this nationality deserves a nation of its own, because there is no country in the world which is exclusively for Jews. Jews were facing atrocities in Europe, and Zionism felt that the only way of ensuring security was that if Jews have a country of their own. And Jews sought a home in the Middle East. In the first decade of the 20th century, tens and thousands of European Jews, they migrated to Middle East. Then came the World War I, and this Ottoman Empire collapsed. Who were the victors at the end of the First World War? Primarily Britain and France. Britain and France, they decided to reorganize the Middle East, and Britain took the control of Palestine. When Britain took control of Palestine, Britain also allowed Jewish migration. That means more and more Jews entered the Palestinian territory. But then tensions arose between the Jews and the Arabs. Both sides committed acts of violence against each other. But by 1930s, British decided, now let's limit Jewish migration. And then Jews decided to organize themselves and fight both Arabs as well as the British. Then came the Holocaust of World War II, where Jews were killed, horrific acts of violence was committed against them. The result was more and more Jews moved to the British Palestine. And then there was a demand for a state, for a country for Jews called Israel. This is the map of 1947. The green is Palestine. These white dots that you see, these are the Jewish settlements, when Jews migrated in large numbers to the British Palestine. And then in 1947, what United Nations did, it approved a plan to divide Palestine. To divide Palestine, one for Jews, one for Arabs. For Arabs, it will be Palestine. For Jews, it will be Israel. So these white areas that you see, it is because of the partition plan, Israel was set up, and the green area is the Palestine. But what about Jerusalem? Jerusalem is sacred for three separate religions, for Muslims, for Christians, for Jews as well. According to this UN plan, Jerusalem was to become a special investment zone. Jews accepted this and declared an independent state of Israel. United States was perhaps the first one to recognize Israel. But Arabs in the entire region, they saw this as another form of European colonialism. That means, why should Jews, who were the immigrants, why should they be provided with a separate land, a separate country? And why this entire Palestinian area is divided into Palestine and Israel? After the Second World War, many Arab states in the region, they also won independence. And then there was the Arab-Israeli War of 1948-49. And in this war, Israel won the war, and in the process, it extended its territory as well. So at the end of this war, when Israel won this war, look at the area of Israel. Israel has now extended into Palestinian territory as well, and Palestinian territory has shrunk over a period of time. And because of this war, all those Palestinians who were residing here, they were expelled. And this led to a massive refugee crisis. At the end of this war, Gaza was with Egypt, West Bank was with Jordan. In 1967, Israel and the neighboring Arab states, they fought another war, a 6-day war. And when this 6-day war ended, Israel seized Golan Heights from Syria, seized West Bank from Jordan, seized Gaza as well, and also seized the Sinai Peninsula of Egypt. And at the end of this war, Israel was occupying Jerusalem as well. In 1978, Israel and Egypt, they signed an accord called Camp David Accord. United States was the mediator, and at the end of this Camp David Accord, Israel gave the Sinai Peninsula back to Egypt. Other states also accepted the reality. And now it turns out that this Arab-Israeli conflict has now transformed itself into Israeli-Palestine conflict. And this is how the present day situation looks like. What is the solution to this Israeli-Palestinian problem? The solution long recommended by everybody is a two-state solution. Let Palestine as a state also exist. Let Israel as a state also exist. Palestine Liberation Organization, headed then by Yasser Arafat, he initially rejected this two-state solution. Yasser Arafat wanted to end Israel because Israel is an occupier. PLO later said that yes, we are for a two-state solution, but Israel has to give us our land back. And over a period of time, what Israel has done, even those areas which are under Palestinian control, their settlements have been started by Israel. Now, Donald Trump has a solution to this problem, which is basically a reiteration of a two-state solution, but something else as well. And this is how the Trump's proposed plan for Palestine looks like. So these green areas will be the Palestinian territory, but even within the Palestinian territory, there will be Israeli enclaves. Palestine will exist as a separate country, but they won't have an airport. Palestine will have to give up its support to terrorists and armed insurgents. All the Palestinian refugees who were forced out of their homes during the 1948 Arab-Israeli war, they will not be allowed to return. Because now they are Israeli territories, they cannot return back. They can settle in a future Palestinian state or any other country. Jerusalem, which is another bone of contention, will remain the undivided capital of Israel. But the Palestinians have rejected this proposal, saying that the entire West Bank as well as Gaza should be part of Palestine. And East Jerusalem should be the capital of Palestine, which Israel and United States do not want. And the Hindu editorial also calls it a planned injustice, because whenever you will have to solve a conflict, it is very important that all the conflicting parties are taken into confidence. By that standard, US President Donald Trump's peace plan for Israel is a failure, because Palestinians have rejected it even before the proposals were unveiled. Palestinians believe that Donald Trump cannot be an impartial negotiator between the two sides. And it is injustice for Palestinians because of three major reasons. One, they have to give up their claim over Jerusalem. Two, their refugees who left because of the Arab-Israeli war, they will not be allowed to return to those areas. And three, they will lose 30% of its West Bank area. So the Hindu editorial says, under current circumstances, it looks more like a plan for further annexation of territories by Israel than one that seeks constructive and lasting peace. That is what you need to understand from this editorial. This column is about prescriptions for our economy. There are one set of economists who believe that for India to come out of this economic slowdown, more and more incentives should be provided to the corporate sector. One incentive was provided in the form of corporate tax cuts. The argument is that if corporate tax is cut, which has been cut, because of this, what will happen? The tax liability for corporates will reduce. If they have less tax liability, that means more profit. This more profit will be used for further recruitments, and ultimately when more and more people are recruited, which means more jobs, more money in the hands of the people, and more growth of Indian economy. But these set of economists go a step further. They say that more and more incentives should be provided, just like hire and fire policy. That means our labor laws should be reformed so that hire and fire policy is implemented, so that India becomes a lucrative destination for foreign companies, so that these foreign companies can shift their base from China, Vietnam, South Korea, and they will come to India. Because in China, they have a hire and fire policy. That means the labor policy will be so liberal, it will incentivize more and more companies to come to India and invest in India. There are other set of economists who believe in that more and more resources should be provided to MGNREGA. More and more money should be allocated to MGNREGA, because of which there will be more money in the hands of the rural people, which will boost the rural demand, and ultimately the growth will start picking up. These set of economists also talk about something called universal basic income. But the author, Mr. Dubey, says that it is time to prioritize education and health. And if we prioritize education and health, it will create demand in the short run, and it will make the economy competitive in the long run as well. How do we prioritize education and health? That means more and more percentage of our GDP should be invested in education and health, which means more and more teachers should be recruited, which means more and more doctors and nurses should be recruited. When more and more teachers, doctors and nurses are recruited, what will happen? People will have more money in their hands. When people will have more money in their hands, they will demand goods and services. When they will demand goods and services, ultimately the growth will start picking up. And if we invest more in education, it is going to help us in our demographic dividend as well. That means more young people, young children will be in a position to access better education. Tomorrow they will not only be job seekers, they will be job creators as well, entrepreneurs as well. So investing in education will be competitive in the long run as well. And if more doctors and nurses are recruited, more and more paramedics are recruited, ultimately it is going to keep our population healthy as well. And only a healthy society can lead to an increase in the GDP growth. That is what you need to understand from this newspaper column. Let's look at another editorial, a mindset problem. Mahatma Gandhi National Rural Employment Guarantee Scheme. Few days ago we discussed this. We discussed that fund crunch is hitting MGNREGA scheme. More than 96% of the funds allocated for MGNREGA scheme, they have been exhausted. Only 2,500 crores are left to be spent. That too in February and March. These are the 2 months remaining in the current financial year. There are 15 states which are not in a position to provide wages to MGNREGA workers because the center has not cleared the dues. And this shortage of funds is going to aggravate rural distress. Because these are the months, January, February, March, where agricultural activity is very low, which means laborers, farmers will be desperately looking for livelihood opportunities. So this was the time that MGNREGA allocation should have increased so that all those who are looking for livelihood opportunities in these months of agricultural inactivity, they would have been provided money, they would have created assets as well, and they will have generated rural demand as well. Because today economists say that the problem is with demand. People in rural India particularly, they are not demanding goods and services because they don't have money in their hands. So one way of helping the economy revive will be to provide more and more cash, more and more money in the hands of the rural people so that the rural demand picks up and economy grows. So according to this editorial, MGNREGA was some sort of an insurance for the poor in the rural India. Whenever their crop fails, MGNREGA was their insurance. Whenever agrarian crisis deepens in rural India, MGNREGA was their insurance. Whenever there was stressed economy in rural India, this MGNREGA was their insurance. And the mindset needs to change, which means that once the budget is passed by the finance minister, more resources should be allocated to MGNREGA so that more resources will lead to better rural demand and ultimately revival of economic story of India. That is what you need to understand from this newspaper editorial. Now let's look at the practice questions. First prelims based questions, then the mains based questions. Question number 1. Which of the following is or are correct regarding Indian Medical Council Professional Conduct, Etiquette and Ethics Regulations 2002? Soliciting of patients directly or indirectly by a physician is unethical. Correct? It's mentioned in the rules. A medical practitioner shall not accept individually any hospitality like hotel accommodation for self and family members under any pretext. Correct? A medical practitioner cannot carry out, participate in, or work in research projects funded by pharmaceutical and allied healthcare industries. This statement is wrong because a medical practitioner can participate in research projects which are funded by pharmaceutical industries. So which of the above statements are correct? Only 1 and 2. Why? What is the context? Because 11 doctors have been censured. Why? Because they featured in an advertisement of a corporate hospital. And you cannot be soliciting patients either directly or indirectly. It is unethical according to these 2002 rules. Let's look at question number 2. Which of the following is or are correct regarding star campaigners? As star campaigners, the expenditure incurred on campaigning is exempt from being added to the expenditure account of a candidate. What is the context? On page number 1 of today's The Hindu newspaper, it says Anurag Parvesh out of BJP star campaigners list. A political party has to send a list of star campaigners to Election Commission and the Chief Electoral Officer of that state. That's point number 1. Point number 2, any candidate who has to contest election or who is contesting election, he has to set up something called election expenses account, so that election commission can look into this account and check whether this candidate has spent money within the limits or not. Let's say for Delhi, 28 lakhs is the limit. A candidate contesting legislative assembly election cannot spend more than 28 lakhs. But if a star campaigner is campaigning for the candidate, then the expenses of these star campaigners are not added to the election expenses account of that candidate. Which means first statement is correct. As star campaigners, the expenditure incurred on campaigning is exempt from being added to the expenditure account of a candidate. Statement 2. A recognized political party can have 40 star campaigners and an unrecognized but registered political party can have 20. This statement is also correct. The list of star campaigners has to be communicated to the CEO and Election Commission within a week from the date of notification of an election. All these statements are correct. Question number 3. Nagoba Jatra is a tribal festival held in which of the following state? Telangana. This is the context. A month-long Nagoba Jatra concludes in Telangana. Let's look at the mains-based questions. Question number 1. Military reforms. For example, the military reforms where CDS was set up. Military reforms are focused on structural changes. The creation of the post of CDS above the 3 service chiefs, possibly followed by the creation of integrated theatre commands, because the role of the CDS would be to set up theatre commands in northern, eastern, southern, western area. Intelligence reforms, on the other hand, will involve heavy duty reforms in both structure as well as process, especially in the recruitment process. Comment on the need for intelligence reforms, as upgrades in military alone are not enough to prioritize national security. So basically what this question demands from you, that the government has implemented some changes in the military. Military reforms have been implemented with the setup of CDS. Now we need intelligence reforms. And in that, there are some who demand Indian Intelligence Service, just like IAS. Such a cadre should also be set up. Comment on the need for intelligence reforms, as upgrades in military alone are not enough to prioritize national security. Let's look at question number 2. Today is the martyrdom of Mahatma Gandhi. At a time when India stares at a growing divide between religious communities and extremism and fundamentalism appear to be on the rise, it must recall what Gandhi stood for and believed and emulated. That is it from our newspaper analysis for today. Thank you for being with us. Have a great day.